Welcome. Today we are going to be taking apart a Dell Inspiron 15 7000 series laptop. This particular model is the 7570. It's a 4K touchscreen laptop. So the first thing we're going to do is turn it over, and I'll be using a small Phillips bit. This is a 2.5, and we're going to go ahead and remove all of these bottom case screws. Alright, once we have those bottom case screws loosened or taken out, we're going to find the small seam here on the back where the bottom case meets the palm rest, and we're going to get a little spudgy or another flat object in there, and we'll just start going around and separating the bottom case from the palm rest. Alright, and then we can remove that bottom case and see the inside of the laptop. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is remove the battery. So to do that, we'll just go ahead and remove the screws holding it in. And with this type of connector, it should just pull straight out laterally. So we're going to loosen the battery, and sometimes this type of connector can be a little bit of a pain to pull out, so we'll see how easy this one comes out. So once you have the battery up and you've given yourself a little bit of space for that connector, it should be okay to kind of hold on to the piece here that they give you and just pull while you're wiggling. Most of these types of connectors, it's definitely beneficial to kind of wiggle it as you're pulling out, because sometimes they can really stick in there, and sometimes it'll damage the connector. So that's how you remove the battery. Alright, so we got an SSD drive here. We'll go ahead and remove the one screw holding that in. And once it flips up, we can pull it straight out, and that's how you replace your SSD drive. Very easy, it's right on top, so if you do need to replace your SSD, all you need is a small screwdriver and a flat bladed object to pop that case off, and that's all you really need to do. And next we'll go ahead and do the Wi-Fi card. Same deal, it's just one screw, and then these antennas just pop straight up and off, and they go on the same way. Just pop them on and pop them off. And then we can pull the card out of the little slot. Alright, so we have one memory stick here. We'll go ahead and spread the little retainers till it flips up, and then we can pull it out of the slot. And it looks like the in-out board also connects the pram battery. So the pram battery, you're going to have to unstick. There's usually some pretty good adhesive here. So we'll go ahead and pop that up. And with this type of connector, there's a small bar that goes around the connector port, and we're going to go ahead and just flip that up with our fingernail, and that will allow you to pull that little connector free. So we have the in-out board disconnected from the motherboard, and now we can remove these screws and remove the little in-out card reader board. Alright, so we'll go ahead and also do the cooling fan here. It looks like it's just a couple screws. Then we'll have the one connector on the motherboard, which is the simple pull-out type. So once you've got a little bit of space there, we can use our fingernails to pop that little connector out of there. Alright, so we got a good view of the heatsink here. Looks like it's a dual heatsink for the CPU and the GPU. These screws are numbered. It doesn't matter which order you remove them, but if you're going to put the heatsink back on, you want to tighten these down according to the numbers that are stamped. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is to evenly tighten the heatsink down on a new thermal paste. But since we're just removing, we'll go ahead and just loosen these screws in any order. Okay, so the heatsink is nice and loose. Oftentimes the thermal paste is kind of old. Like once the thermal paste gets about a couple years old, it can act like a pretty strong glue. So if your heatsink doesn't come out very easy, you want to kind of wiggle it and just make sure that you have loosened all of these screws. And if it still doesn't come out, just wiggle it back and forth until you overcome the stickiness of the thermal paste. That's how you remove the heatsink. Alright, so we got a nice view of the motherboard. Looks like we've removed everything around it except for the stuff that's staying on the palm rest, which will be the speakers and the touchpad and the keyboard. So we're going to go ahead and remove the connectors that are attached to the motherboard, and then we'll remove the screws for the motherboard. And it looks like the DC jack we can also replace right now as well, or remove. So just a single screw for that DC jack, and then just grab the little tabs with your fingernail and pull it straight out of the connector. Alright, so for the touchpad, this type of connector, you flip up the little retainer and that will allow you to pull out the ribbon. This type is the same, but the little flip up part is on the back side. So just use your fingernail, flip that up, and then flip it back down once you've removed the ribbon to help it keep from getting broken. Same for the keyboard, just flip it up and flip it back down. And just repeat. Speakers, normal type connector. We'll just get that with our fingernails and wiggle it out. And for the video cable here, also has a small retainer bar. So we're going to flip that up with our fingernail and just use that bar to pull that connector free. And then for the little webcam connection here, it's got a flip up type. So we'll flip it up and pull that connector out. Alright, so it looks like we've got all of the ribbons and cables that are going to the motherboard. Now we'll go ahead and remove the screws. Alright, so we got those screws removed, and we'll go ahead and just wiggle the motherboard a little bit, make sure that it feels like it's nice and loose. And then once you start pulling it up from the case, we'll just gently turn it over and make sure that there's no ribbons on the bottom side, which there are not. And that is how you remove the motherboard. Alright, so it looks like the keyboard is removable on this model. It looks like there's just a large number of small Phillips head screws labeled for a 1.5, so you'll need a small 1.5 Phillips bit and a lot of patience to remove this keyboard because there's a lot of screws. touchpad, it looks like there's just the 4 screws here on top. So that's going to be a lot easier to replace, and the speakers just held on by grommets, so those also easy to replace. So now we're going to go ahead and make sure that we've freed the cables that are coming from the display assembly, and it looks like they are. And now we can go ahead and remove these hinge screws, and then we'll go ahead and flip up the hinges and separate the palm rest. Another method you can use is just to open it up before you remove the hinge screws, and that way when you remove the last ones, the display will just kind of separate by itself. In this case, I like to do it by just removing the screws, and then I'll manually move those hinges up. That way, since I'm not trying to hold the assembly while I'm removing the last screws, it's just a little bit easier. So once you get those screws out, just flip that hinge up and out of the way, and make sure that those little cables aren't going to get caught, and then we can pull the palm rest free from the display assembly. So that is it for the palm rest. Like I said, the keyboard is a number of screws, but it should be replaceable, and then the touchpad is just the 4 screws up top, and then that should come out. So that's how you remove the palm rest assembly. Alright, so we are left with the LCD. This type uses since it's a touch screen, I believe, it has a digitizer assembly in the front. So most of the time these assemblies will have the LCD screen attached to the front plastic bezel here by some pretty strong adhesive. So this type of display is probably not going to be a good idea to try to take it apart yourself and replace the LCD. So unless you have a lot of specialty tools like a laptop repair shop, I would definitely recommend just replacing your LCD assembly as a whole and not trying to fight with separating the back cover and the bezel, because it is a complete pain, and you definitely risk breaking the glass front bezel or your screen. They're both really thin pieces, and they have to be basically pried apart after you get them really hot with a heat gun. So it's definitely a better idea to just leave the display assembly as a whole and take it out and replace it using the steps in this video. So that is how you disassemble a Dell Inspiron 15 7000 series. And again, this one was the 7570. So all of the 7000 series laptops should be identical or near identical to the steps you just saw. So if this video helped you or you found it informative, please like and subscribe. Thank you.